What's up, guys? It is Sam here, and I wanted to talk about SpaceX's approval from the FCC to launch their satellites into low orbit space for internet access, and what that means to Tesla going forward. Before I do that, make sure you press that red button that says subscribe and that little bell notification so YouTube can notify you every time I post a new video. Now, with that being said, let's get into it. Okay, I looked at the actual filing document with the FCC, and they were requesting access for it looks like the initial stage of testing. They wanted to test for 60 days in this KU band. It's very actually interesting. Not that I understood a lot of what the fuck they were talking about, but it was interesting. Let me see if I can pull it back up in here where they talked about the filing. I can't find it. But definitely very interesting. I also looked up the company because it's actually a subsidiary of SpaceX. SpaceX Holding, Space Exploration Holding LLC, where Elon and Gwen Shotwell, who is I think the COO or CEO of SpaceX, those are the directors, and the officers are Gwen and Tim Hughes. And remember that name, Tim Hughes, because I will I'll bring him up at a later date and tie it all together. Now, to just give a little bit of context, if you follow Tesla over the years, there's been multiple instances where it's either implied or directly stated how they like to have integration from just from front to back, right? Like just across the board integration, whether it's vertical or horizontal integration, the software and the hardware integration, to provide a better experience and also to have potentially more flexibility or performance doing that. And Tesla has been known to mention that multiple times. And how this ties into SpaceX, right? SpaceX is getting approval to launch these satellites into low Earth orbit, so that's below where all the debris is, and they're requesting approval in the longer term for like 4,500 satellites to provide, faster internet than traditional satellite internet, which is like 5 megabits or something like that, roughly. So getting this approval and starting to launch these into low orbit Earth. So in the space, because there's different levels, just degrees of distance from the Earth, or whatever the correct terminology is for that. And if you're able to provide internet around the world, not only is that potentially a business opportunity for countries, maybe say in India or Africa, or even just rural parts of the United States, to provide some type of wireless internet that is better than just very subpar or suboptimal internet that we might have been used to, say, if you live in a city of some sort, not necessarily in the rural areas, but if you know what I mean, you're getting 20 to, say, 100 megabits down and 5 or 10 megabits up. So having something of that nature and then to go to something where it was like 3G for your internet at home would just be completely crazy. So having something like this where you can have much higher speed would be nice. And if you know Tesla has a standard connectivity package. I'm going to tie all this together in a second. Tesla has a standard connectivity package with their vehicles. And they have a premium connectivity package. Standard is free. The premium is free for 1 year. This is obviously initially. This is as of 4/29/2019. The premium package costs $100 a year, and then you get access to. There's no stated data cap for the internet, but currently you can't like watch videos, according to the Tesla spokesperson. But that could probably change in the future with full autonomy, and that ties into full autonomy. When full autonomy is here, whether that's Elon's prediction is sometime they'll have robo-taxis in 2020, or it's 2021 or 2022, right? It's relatively very, very close, and I don't think a lot of people realize that. But the options or things that people might want to do, the data that people are going to want to consume when they don't have to drive anymore, is going to go up drastically. And I'm not sure. I think the Tesla network is in the U.S. is mainly on the AT&T network. I remember reading that a couple years ago. But the cost, right, is Tesla's paying for that. And more than likely, if it has anything to do with similar to, say, how some contracts are structured for commercial use in cell phones, and it's probably similar with a car. Not only the quantity of items on there, right? So if you have 4 cell phones versus 10 cell phones on a plan, 10 cell phones cost more than 4, independent of the amount of data usage. So probably the number of cars on the network, and then the actual data usage has some type of effect, right? Like between these bands, it doesn't cost anything other than the additional cost for additional car on the network to AT&T. But once you go above that data threshold, then it starts costing more money. And the Tim Hughes, who is the VP, the Senior Vice President and General Counsel at SpaceX, I actually found a video on YouTube where he is, and this is back in 2012, he is at a space type of a conference, and he mentions how SpaceX also, because there's not as much interest in SpaceX as there is Tesla, and there's not as much information because they're not a publicly traded company, they're private. So the amount of interest or the amount of information on SpaceX is not as available, so you kind of have to dig a little bit more. And this is back in 2012, so 7 years ago. So this guy's clearly been there for a while, Tim Hughes, and he's the general counsel, mentions how SpaceX is getting things way more efficient through integrating the manufacturing in-house. And he throws out a figure of 80% of the manufacturing is done in-house based on the value of the rocket. So I found that very interesting. That was back in 2012. That was like ancient times compared to how fast things are going today. So to consider that that same ethos is at SpaceX, where they want to control everything, similar to how Apple is, and how that is same thing over at Tesla, to then create a network which would allow you to have internet access around the globe with these satellites, and coming up with full autonomy, which is more than likely going to at some point facilitate the greater use of data, and to be able to have one unified understand, because you can get more data from the vehicle also if you control that pathway or if you understand what is happening right there. So having that globally from SpaceX, Tesla could switch their cars over to this network immediately, especially if it's going to be, it could potentially be a commercial thing for SpaceX to provide internet access if it's slightly competitive I feel like the amount of users on there would have to be tremendous. So in order for that to make sense, right, or subsidized from governments around the world if they're trying to provide internet. So think about that for a second. If governments around the world are going to help subsidize these satellites, the cost of this for their citizens, and you need a tremendous amount of users to be able to spread that fixed cost over it, think about whether this starts to deploy in 2020, 2021, or whatever the case is. The ability for Tesla to switch over and have, a million, 1.5 million, maybe 2 million, depending on the time frame, of vehicles on the road, that they could immediately switch over to this network of cars all the way around the world that are just going to be connected to the internet. Then they can get rid of that cost of the service providers that they're paying. They'll be able to centralize all that information. So instead of managing multiple contracts around the world, they could just manage the one, more than likely around the world. There might be like one-off cases here and there, but more than likely just switch it to one provider, which would be SpaceX. They could help SpaceX through that process, because then SpaceX is able to spread the fixed cost of those satellites around them. And given all the data that we have about how Tesla and SpaceX like to integrate everything and manufacture it themselves or take care of it themselves, I don't see this as actually, obviously this is conjecture, but I don't see this as too far of a stretch for this thing to actually take place if this comes to fruition in the next year or two. So let me know what your thoughts are down below in the comments. Let me know how crazy this is to tie this in, or how off the fucking wall it is. But let me know down below in the comments, or reach out to me on Instagram. Link will be in the description. I appreciate you guys. Peace.